Drew and KB on this non-victory Monday. Clean out your locker Monday. The offseason starts today, the coldest day of the winter Monday. Happy to be joined by our buddy Aaron Nagler of Cheesehead TV. All of our conversations with Nags presented by Rogers Behavioral Health, Hildebrand Law, the great taste of Miller Lite, and Orthopedic Associates of Wisconsin. There is a difference. Good afternoon, Nags.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Happy offseason. How we doing?
Well, we're processing. We're going through the stages. Anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance, smacking down people who think people should be fired and just have given up hope. Nags, where do we start? Your thoughts on what transpired yesterday? Because to me, it was like the entire recipe of everything they needed to do to win, they did not do, and it was established early.
I mean, early. You're not joking early. I mean, the very first play, the game early. I mean, when you spend all week talking about, I like their chances if they can play a clean game, and they got to play a clean game. They got to get a hot start. Got to make sure they don't turn the ball over, and they basically blow all of that up on the very first play of the game. You know you're in for a long night. Now, I will say, I suspected the defense would play well, and they played well. But I also suspected that the offense would maybe not flip a switch, but look a lot different than what we had seen over the course of the last two games in particular. That certainly didn't materialize. I mean, I understand Philadelphia is very good, and as Matt often says, you got to tip your cap. They did a great job. But, man, it's not like the Packers did themselves any favor repeatedly shooting in the foot, which has kind of been the MO on this team all year long.
You know, when you start quoting stats, and a lot of times stats, it's just people turn to stats when they feel bad about losing and they need to make themselves feel better. You know, it's like analytics, right?
Sure.
But you're always looking for that silver lining. And the Packers held Philly to 22 points. Well, I'm going to say 29. After I was just so glad that Barkley's run, that wasn't a career-ending injury.
Right. That he slid down.
Okay, so let's say 29. Right? But after spotting them 4 turnovers and one on the, 18-yard line or whatever, and only 22 points, there's talent in the defense.
Yeah, there is. And I think you can definitely see that Hafley is, working. That's been a good hire.
That offensive line of Phillies is sick.
Yes.
It's just sick how good it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. They are extremely good. They are extremely talented. They are extremely well coached, and they are excellent players. You put all that together. Yeah, they're formidable.
It's like the old Hogs at Washington times 10.
That's pretty good.
They're pretty good. That's a good reference. Yeah, Nags, my takeaway was that the NFL is a league of tiers, Tiers.
Right.
And the Packers aren't in that tier. They're kind of on the fringe of that Detroit, Kansas City, Buffalo tier right now. Philadelphia probably in that club. But they're also not in the tier with people think they're Tennessee or Miami or Dallas or Chicago. Right. They're not. No. They're above them.
Of course.
Like, so they're in the second cut of the rough there, KB, or the first cut.
Yeah, it's in the first.
Well, but what's tough too is that you come into that game and you got a bunch of reinforcements essentially on defense from guys who had been injured, right? And they come in there and look, the defense holds up well and plays a pretty damn good ball game. Then you flip it around on the offensive side and you're losing guys left and right. I mean, you blink and there's another wide receiver down. You got Elton Jenkins out early in the game, and none of the backups could hold water. So the cascading effect, I think, from Christian Watson's injury on really caught up to them last night. It's not an excuse, but it certainly played out during the game.
For those who are putting this on Love, and yes, could he have played better? Yes. Should he have been more precise with some throws? Yes. Would have made a big difference? Hard to say. But I was thinking, and as I was driving home from Packers OT last night, Nags, I was thinking about that. The season when Jordy Nelson blew out his ACL in the preseason game. It was season
2015.
2015. They end up going 10-6. They win a playoff game against Washington. Like, they lost their last 2 regular season games to gack away the division, finishing second, went on the road, beat Washington, played Arizona, got beat by Carson Palmer. And that was the game with the Hail Mary, the Janis game.
2 Hail Marys.
Rodgers is trying to make chicken salad with Abradaris and Janis running around, right? And like, he didn't have Jordy Nelson. They had a young Devontae Adams who wasn't Devontae Adams yet. They had James Jones, and Cobb was like the one threat.
Right.
But when you limit the weapons and you ask Jordan Love or anybody to beat the number 1 defense in the league on their home field in the playoffs with receivers 4, 5, and 6. That's a pretty tall order.
It's a tall task. That said, man, I understand fans being frustrated with Jordan Love after that performance because he was not good, right?
No.
And given the contract he was handed this past offseason, the idea that, okay, you're right, you're down a number of dudes, your offensive line's banged up, but the idea would be, I think from the outside looking in, well, we handed you this contract. You're supposed to be the guy. You're supposed to be the franchise guy. You're supposed to not only elevate your play in these scenarios, but elevate the play of those guys around you. And I'm not saying that it's all on Love, but I understand fans looking at that performance and having some questions. You expect better. The bigger the game gets, the better you want your stars to play. That certainly didn't happen last night.
That's true. And how much of that is on LaFleur? Like you mentioned, Elton Jenkins going out. That's huge. But LaFleur did not have a good day and hasn't been good for a couple of weeks.
Very much agreed.
The jet sweep motion is running.
Wasn't good against Minnesota and definitely not good against the Bears. Right.
Well, it's just curious to me that, for years I've been begging either Mike McCarthy before him or now Matt LaFleur to run the ball. You guys know we sell his shirt, run the freaking ball. I love running the football, but the assumption in that statement is because it helps your quarterback. And they finally had an offense this year that could run the ball with efficiency very consistently. And yet they never seem to find any kind of rhythm off of the running game, which is baffling to me because I do think they have talent at wide receiver. I do think Matt is a really good game planner and play caller. But for the life of me, I could never find any kind of rhythm in this offense. And that's surprising to me, given that it should have been nothing in the NFL is easy. But if you're ripping off these runs with Josh Jacobs, eventually you got to think, okay, and now we get to the play action where Jordan turns his back on the defense for a moment, whips his head around, finds a guy 15 yards in, downfield in that dagger route. But that just was never on display with any kind of consistency. It certainly wasn't last night.
Well, they came out early and tried to run the ball, and it was the old thing they fall back into. They didn't have success, and they go back to throwing it. And then the only time I really saw it kick in was in the second half on the one drive where they scored the touchdown.
Well, they came out and they started attacking the edges of the line, right? When some of those toss plays, both, trying to get outside, and then they had some inside zone toss stuff, and that worked. And I think that was a decent way to go about it. But, and I get it. Look, Matt said it after the game. They played a ton of too high, soft zone, right? Some kind of combination of cover two-man, lots of keep it all in front of you. And the Packers couldn't run them out of it. That is the way to beat that team. But if you're only getting 2-3 yards per carry, they're never going to commit that extra body. They're going to keep playing back and then triggering when you hand the ball because they're limiting you, because they're owning the line of scrimmage. And that's where the game was lost, pretty much on both sides of the ball, but especially on offense.
Talking to Aaron Nagler, Cheesehead TV, doing great business at Cheesehead TV with people wanting to comment on this. And we'll take your comments on the NicoletLaw.com talk and text line 877-794-1973. All right, but Nags, like we expect everything to be linear, and this season didn't go as well as last season. We were talking a lot last week about vibes, and I feel like the vibe now is maybe in a week or two, maybe when the playoffs end and we see who's crowned the champion, people come around the fact that, okay, the Packers, we were saying before, our analogy is it's not a tear down. We just need to maybe redo the powder room and put new carpeting in one of the kids' rooms. Right. It's just a couple of tweaks. Get rid of
the builder grade fixtures.
A couple of tweaks. Builder grade fixtures have to go. So this isn't, all hope should not be lost, but I know people are bummed about what happened.
Yes.
But damn, they have money to play with. They've got a good core of guys that are mostly coming back. They might be able to get rid of some pieces. There's going to be the usual roster turnover, but what about at the top of that roster? We were going to play a game later called Should He Stay or Should He Go? Like Jair's at the top of that list.
Yes, of course he is. Of course he is. And I got to suspect he's gone, especially considering what we heard from the locker room today about his not wanting to meet with reporters and legit saying, I don't have anything good to say. And I just think, and apparently he also said, I don't think I'm even going to be, I don't even know if I'm going to be here next year. So let's end the suspense. I'll be shocked if Jair's back next year.
Okay. A couple other guys. I mean, Josh Myers, there's a guy I might like to hang on.
Oh, poor Josh, man. What is he? 3 minutes away from free agency, and then he gets leg whipped with friendly fire. What a horrible development for Josh. And, I'll say this. It kind of makes the decision for the Packers, right? But I don't think they were going to bring him back anyway.
He also played the whole season with a torn pec, we found out, too.
Right.
It's like, oh, my God, what a beast. That makes his season even more impressive.
Exactly. And that's the kind of thing where, it's hard because I get it. Like, people pour over the film and they look at this stuff and they think, well, this guy's doing XYZ. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff going on we can never know. But ultimately, you are judged by what you put on tape, what your play is between the white lines. And whatever excuse, whatever reasons are going on, you're still expected to perform if you're out there.
Okay, so all the Packers need, and this is the prescription for the offseason, all they really need to do is go back to the well and find the cornerback and wide receiver 1 version of Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs. Easy peasy.
Easy. Just go to those stores. Go to the corner store. Exactly. Go to the wide receiver store and pick them up. No question.
What about people saying that they should trade Jair for Devontae straight up and let's go back? Let's go to town.
I just, this is when I miss Ted Thompson, because he would say, this isn't fantasy football. I mean, it's fun ideas and it's fun banter, but I don't think it's anything approaching reality. I will say, though, I mean, you intimated there, they are entering an offseason for the first time in a long time where they have some maneuverability. Now, it's not like they have $100 billion in cap space or anything like that, but they do have space. They do have some kind of maneuverability to go make some moves if they think they can find the types of guys they found last offseason. And, McKinney and Jacobs, young ascending guys who might be ready to hit their prime, so to speak. Now, it's rare that those guys hit the market, but you never know. Bonuses coming up. Maybe there's questions about depth on other teams. I mean, that's why McKinney was available. They liked their young guys behind him and they let him go. So we'll see what transpires over the offseason. I just know that the Packers do, like I said, for the first time in a long time, essentially since pre-pandemic time, they've got a bunch of cap space and maneuverability to go make the kind of moves they want to make.
And they're riding a wave of successful free agency with even McManus added to McKinney and 100%. Jacobs.
No doubt. They've made the right calls in those instances. No question about it.
Yeah.
So Nags, when answer me this, riddle me this, Nags.
Mm-hmm.
When you have an offensive coordinator and a head coach,
right?
But the head coach calls the plays,
right?
What use is the offensive coordinator?
Mm-hmm. Well, he does a lot of the work as far as scouting tendencies for upcoming opponents. Also, throughout the offseason, putting together whatever your playbook ends up looking like, moving from whatever you were doing last year to the year that you're heading into. Things like route combinations, blocking schemes, trying to find new and interesting ways to utilize kind of the old stuff that works, but you've got to dress it up differently. There's a lot that goes into it, and there may be different areas that Matt tasks him with, like, I need you to work on XYZ. What's problematic to me is when people start talking about assistant coaches, and it's like, oh, this guy or that guy is doing poorly at his job. And I'm not saying that's what you're intimating here, but it's
no.
But it's just funny to me that when the Packers are riding high on offense, it's, oh, Matt LaFleur is amazing. And then when the Packers start doing poorly on offense, that's the only time I ever hear Steno's name brought up. And again, I know that's not what you're doing, but it's just funny that we have no idea on the outside. These guys do almost like 90% of their work behind closed doors.
Sure.
And so when people start saying, well, they should, because they didn't have a very good pass rush this year, right? And everyone's in on, oh, well, they got to look at the defensive staff. Well, can we let them get a few more pieces in place before we start calling for assistant coaches? Because, again, we have no idea what goes on in meeting rooms and on the practice field.
I'm not calling out, anyone for not being good, but the only thing that I'm thinking is if you have a head coach who's calling the plays, is that not a little bit distracting? I mean,
no, but he has to also supervise everything, right? And
but then no, I'm going to call the plays. I've always struggled with that.
I hear you, but it is, pretty. I mean, not across the board, but pretty standard procedure. I mean, if you think about all the great offensive coaches in the league currently, almost all of them call the plays. Yeah. It's usually defensive guys who delegate. Not always, but usually.
But if you're an offensive guy, you're probably going to want to call the plays.
Call the plays.
Yep.
I mean, you worked your whole life to get there. I mean, I want to go down with my own play calls.
Rich Bisaccia didn't fumble and he didn't miss a 38-yard field goal, but he's the special teams coach. So a lot of people say he's making a lot of money. What does he do here?
Right.
What's he bringing to the party? We just heard that Keyshawn Nixon doesn't want to return kicks anymore. But he hasn't been good in the last year and a half.
Not very good at it in this new format, is he? It's kind of
Anyway,
interesting how that works, right?
So where do you come down on Bisaccia in that conversation?
Well, I think he's got the implicit trust of Matt LaFleur, which is, funny to me when people start talking about, well, we got to talk about Bisaccia. Well, can we talk about everything he does, which includes being the assistant head coach? He is not just a special teams coordinator. And I understand there have been so much hand-wringing around special teams in Green Bay for so long. Feels like a, annual tradition. But he also values Rich in lots of different ways as far as a sounding post and an advisor and all that stuff. So, I mean, only Matt LaFleur can answer that question, obviously. But I do think, he's not just a special teams coordinator.
And folks who think, well, he's making a lot of money, which may or may not be true in the scheme. He's like the highest paid special teams coordinator, whatever.
Sure. Right.
That's not preventing them from signing a player.
It's not. Two things, right? It doesn't count against the cap. And B, it ain't your money. What do you care what he's making?
Nags, final thing here, and this is the trend. And I had said, and it goes back to, we had a call earlier about, look at their first round picks. Like, forget Rasheed Walker and the guys who overachieved from rounds 4 through 7.
No, that never gets highlighted.
Play like first rounders because it's always the first round picks. But, with that said, I did say going into this game that Dobbs and Kenny Clark were my two guys that had to shine. Didn't hear Kenny Clark's name the entire game. It was a rough year for him in terms of production, right? Double teams. Right. I know you're his guy, and but he had a rough year.
I'll just point this out about Kenny, because I know the pitchforks are out for him because of the contract, and the way people just look at players through the lens of the contract will never stop bothering me. But I understand it. You sign that contract, you do get looked at, and look, his production absolutely down comparative to what you would expect given what he was signed for. Certainly you expected a lot more disruption of the quarterback position. But I will say, it's not magic that made the run defense suddenly improve because, they just switched schemes. No, they switched schemes and they have the guys up front to help do it. Kenny's a big part of that. You're talking about double teams. Yeah. True. Every game plan from the opponent starts with, how do we block Kenny Clark?
My thing is, aside from McKinney and Jacobs in the big games against the teams that they needed to beat, Detroit, Minnesota, Philadelphia, the big guys disappeared.
Pretty much. And that's
Jordan Love's at the top of the list.
Year. Yes. 100%.
Jordan Love's at the top of that list. Kenny Clark's on that list.
Started talking about that in the Minnesota game because, obviously that opening drive, Jacobs puts the ball on the carpet, the way they go. Your best players have to play their best to beat the best. And this year in particular, the Packers, certainly that did not happen from week to week.
Well, there's a couple guys out there. We need the old Lombardi thing and say, here, carry this football around for the next 6 months.
I mean, it feels like the entire offense needs to do that.
Oh, my God.
Yes. Pretty much anyone who handled the ball this year at some incredibly inopportune time put it on the ground.
True. Nags, we got so much to go through. The first day of the offseason, I think it's 237 days till they play meaningful tackle football again.
Only?
We got a lot of time. Only.
Blink, it's going to be over.
The cruelest part of the NFL is the length of the offseason.
It's the worst.
But it's worst. The best. It's the best.
Hey, but look at this. Look at it this way. We've got the draft coming to Green Bay.
Yes. Oh, God.
A few short months.
There.
And I'm going to be down at the Super Bowl. We're going to be at the Combine.
We'll be at the Super Bowl with you.
I'll be exactly, and then I'm going to be at the draft. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Going to be a blast. Thanks for joining us, bud. We'll talk to you down the road.
Talk to you soon.